Hi, I'm Lilu. Let's talk about endometriosis. I hope I'm in focus, and I hope you can't hear the cicadas. There is nothing I can do about that. We're going to worry about what's in our control. Welcome back to ENDO101, my series of educational videos all about endometriosis. Today we're going to be covering the intersection between endometriosis and neuroscience. We'll be specifically taking a look at two articles that were recently published into scientific journals that review recent research within those fields. The first article we'll be taking a look at is Cognitive Functioning in Females with Endometriosis-Associated Chronic Pelvic Pain, a Literature Review, written by Ashlee Berryman and Liana Mikado and published to the Oxford Academics Archives of Clinical Neurophysiology on January 18, 2025. This article reviews 18 previously performed studies that were trying to find the correlation between chronic pelvic pain and cognitive dysfunction. 8 of these studies are specifically about endometriosis. The other 10 focus on patients with chronic pelvic pain in general, not specifically endometriosis. The reason that the criteria for this review had to be broadened a bit like that is just because there isn't enough research as it is on endometriosis specifically. There were studies where people that are assigned female at birth and experiencing chronic pelvic pain were given brain functioning tests, and 6 out of 7 participants were shown to have issues with memory or thinking clearly. Additionally, brain scans were conducted on people with endometriosis-associated chronic pelvic pain, and there were actual physical changes to the neurocircuitry that would support those deficits seen on those brain functioning tests. I had the honor of speaking with PhD candidate and research assistant at the University of Otago's Department of Psychology in Dunedin, New Zealand, Ashlee Berryman, who co-wrote the article in question. She also recently presented her research at the World Endometriosis Congress in Sydney, Australia. My computer did decide to corrupt the file of the actual video recording of our interview, so I only have audio, but we'll make do.
The evidence was conclusive that there is just a ridiculous amount of cognitive complaints. I think I came to the conclusion that at least 60% of biological women with the condition report cognitive complaints. It did go as high as the high 80s in some of those cross-sectional based studies. Either way, there's definitely a big enough issue that people are coming forward and making these complaints.
So if we already know that brain fog commonly occurs with endometriosis, why do we need to continue to study that? Why do we need reviews and studies to come out saying that brain fog occurs with endometriosis? Well, for scientists to continue to research endometriosis, to research why this brain fog occurs and what can be done to treat it, there needs to be established foundational research that they can refer back to.
Before we can just go straight in and think, awesome, what interventional studies can we run, or what modifiable lifestyle factors can we help incorporate into these women's lives to address either the pain or the cognitive disruptions they're having at home? We can't do that without first doing what we call a characterization phase, where we have people blatantly come into a lab, sit down at a computer and undergo a battery of cognitive tasks. We need to objectively measure those deficits first before we can put any funding forward to be able to resolve the problem, even though it's clear the problem does exist. We can't do all of it at once, and this is why getting the research out now is so important, so that people are seeing these issues around the world and each person can help tackle them one at a time and bring together this sort of collective answer.
One of the main takeaways from the review is that much more research is needed to fully understand and effectively treat endometriosis.
I think the next steps, assuming my lab are able to publish the next 2 experimental chapters that are showing these objective deficits, and with a few other researchers, both from Australia and internationally, putting forward the same results, or at least consistent patterns, we have enough as our collective research group to be able to go, hey, it's time we start making these interventional-based strategies. The big part of that, which is also sort of tapped into in my systematic review, is that there are so many comorbidities or modifiable lifestyle factors, or what we call covariates, that could also be contributing to the cognitive distinctions that we're seeing in these cohorts, and so they also need to be addressed.
The other article that we're taking a look at today is Unveiling the Mechanisms of Pain in Endometriosis, Comprehensive Analysis of Inflammatory Sensitization and Therapeutic Potential, by Yachao Chen and Tian Li from the National Clinical Research Center for Obstetrics and Gynecology of the Tongji Medical College at Huazhong University in China. I definitely pronounced at least a couple things wrong there, I'm so sorry. The article takes a look at previously conducted studies to explain how different factors might lead to ongoing inflammation and nerve sensitivity in people with endometriosis, with a goal to better understand what causes the pain and to suggest possible new ways to treat it. To better understand the contents of this article, I had a chat with clinical naturopath, nutritionist, and neuroscientist Renee Grandi, who specializes in complex women's health, neuroinflammation, fertility, and mind-body medicine at her practice, the Women's Integrative Health Clinic, based in Australia.
When I looked at that article, I resonated a lot with it from my perspective. Endometriosis is absolutely multifaceted. There is so many variables that need to be taken into consideration when looking at women with endometriosis. We're looking at the genetic sequencing side of things, the gut microbiome, the increased histamine, the estrogen to progesterone ratios, the neuroinflammatory side of things, and that neuroimmune interface again from the peripheral to the central nervous systems and how that influences the pain signaling.
The article explores inflammation and how it plays into endometriosis and focuses on how that can lead to nociceptive sensitization, which is a process in which pain receptors, called nociceptors, become more sensitive to stimuli, leading to a lower threshold for pain and an increased pain response. Over time, this contributes to chronic pain in patients with endometriosis.
When your body registers that there's inflammation, it's going to get sent through that spinal cord into the brain, and then your brain has to do something with that. A lot of the time, though, it's so chronic that this is where that pain sensitization comes in. You have just got this excessive stimulation from everything happening, and you have depleted the mechanisms that are going to shut it off. If we think about like the histamine perspective, you have increased inflammation, then you have the inflammatory cascade that happens with your tumor necrosis factor alpha, your interleukin 6, your interleukin 1 beta, your necrosis factor kappa beta, your all of your inflammatory cascades, your cytokines, they're infiltrating that as a defense mechanism. And if we think of everything that your body is doing from its initial acute defense mechanism stage, it is there to naturally protect the body. So women with the increased histamine, that is going to support increased blood flow. It is going to support that pain sensitization to let you know that something is wrong. It is going to increase that glutamate, which is your excitatory neurotransmitter, to stimulate that peripheral nervous system to the dorsal root ganglion in the spinal cord to then get sent through to the central nervous system, the spinal cord and the brain, and then the brain can register it. But then you have over excitability of inflammatory cascades and histamine. And with histamine, you're naturally going to create the vascular endothelial growth factor. And that's a growth factor that is shown to be increased in women with endometriosis within their pelvic areas. And that is going to increase blood flow and vascularization. But the problem with that is that because it is such an inflammatory area, you're going to have more inflammation stemming from that. So acutely, if it was something that was acute, your body is kind of doing the right thing. But because endometrial lesions are not being targeted and optimized therapeutically, you kind of have this consistent feedback loop that's happening there.
That vascular endothelial growth factor that Renee mentioned contributes to neoangiogenesis, which is a cellular phenomenon I discussed in my previous ENDO101 video. Something really fascinating that was highlighted by this review is that inflammatory cytokines, which are signaling molecules released by immune cells, can trigger inflammation in response to endometriosis and alter how cells communicate. These changes can affect gene expression and alter your DNA, particularly how anti-inflammatory genes are transcribed.
So the other interesting thing that happens when you have a pro-inflammatory microenvironment, is that it's going to change the way that your DNA is transcribed. So for instance, this is how inflammation works. When you have these pro-inflammatory molecules that I've described previously, they are going to change the way that your molecules and cells are communicating with each other. They are going to change the way your cellular mitochondria work, which is your cellular energy. That cellular energy is critical for the way the cell functions and communicates with other cells. It is also going to be in communication with your immune system, because your immune system has to check what your cells are like. Are they in danger? Are we worried about pathogens? Is this a good cell? Is this a bad cell? Do I need to get rid of this cell? And so you have basically like this immune storm of a conversation going on, and there's a lot of different communication that's happening. When that happens, your body does not have the facilitation to optimize the way your DNA is transcribed. So that is going to alter how your anti-inflammatory genes are transcribed. And then you have pro-inflammatory genes that are upregulated. Sometimes these can be thousands of genes, not just like one or two. Like this can be like 3,000 genes that are upregulated, 3,000 genes that are downregulated. So you can imagine the cascade that happens with those types of up and down regulations. It's going to create and extend and exacerbate that pro-inflammatory environment. Women with endometriosis have significantly higher rates of anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and trauma. So if you think about what happens when you have mental health or if you've experienced trauma, you have such a chronic upregulation of cortisol and norepinephrine or noradrenaline. On top of that, you also have very specific pathways in your brain that is associated with pain. And your body, your brain doesn't really know how to differentiate internal and external pain, which is often why internal pain is just as bad as physical pain. So you have the particular areas in your brain, like your hippocampus, which is associated with your trauma memory, and the anterior cingulate cortex and your amygdala. So that limbic system of the brain is compromised with women with endometriosis as well. So this is really where the neuroimmune interface comes as well, because once you have that pelvic inflammation, you've got the gut inflammation, you've got the increased inflammatory pathways happening through your spinal cord, you've then got a central nervous system imbalance.
The article ultimately concludes that pain in endometriosis is likely caused by a combination of complex processes in the body, mostly relating to long-term inflammation.
Really, if you were to summarize this, you have depleted serotonin and dopamine. And often what also happens with women with endometriosis is that because of the hyperexcitability of glutamate, their cortisol will initially increase a lot, but then it's going to deplete because the body can't keep up with it. So then you have more of that real chronic fatigue. And that comes with lower cortisol, depleted cortisol, and then depleted norepinephrine and noradrenaline. So this is why you have to be looking at endometriosis as a neuroimmune, hormonal, complex, multifaceted condition, extremely intertwined with the central nervous system. I don't think conventional medicine is doing justice to this research at all. And I actually think that it's just inherently wrong, because we have foundational knowledge now to be able to properly treat endometriosis. There's absolutely a nervous system pathway that needs to be addressed with endometriosis. And again, it's not being addressed anywhere. It is so rare that a practitioner or a doctor is going to support your nervous system in endometriosis. You are not treating the root cause at all. You're also dismissing every other bit of scientific literature about all the other pathways that we've discussed. And you're not doing justice to the woman who's sitting in front of you that deserves proper treatment.
Continuing this research, as well as actually applying the research within doctors' offices, could make a big difference in getting quicker and more accurate diagnosing, better treatment, and just a better understanding of what patients with endometriosis are actually experiencing. It's pretty widely agreed upon at this point that endometriosis is severely under-researched. But the other component to that is that the research we do have isn't always actually being applied in practice in those doctors' offices. Just like ripe fruit ready for picking, these advancements in science eagerly await the opportunity to be implemented in practice.
I'm extremely hopeful, and I'm hoping as I develop more, this sort of taps more into the experimental chapters rather than the literature review alone. It's all well and good to sort of bring the awareness to other people, clinicians, practitioners alike, and so on, to go, hey, look, maybe we should start exploring the cognitive components. But in the meantime, I'm trying to tackle that in my lab. I can't talk too much at the moment about the results of my experimental chapter because it's in preparation to be published. But we have at least, and I'm allowed to say, established that there are objective cognitive deficits between people who have endo with chronic pain and our healthy controls. And so the next step, which has just finished data collection, is to, of course, do a replication study before we can put forward intervention-based strategies to clinicians, at least in New Zealand. But from there, at the very least starting phase, it should be consideration of the cognitive factors associated with endometriosis, which is going to be a bigger barrier than it sounds. It's not just a matter of going, here's some mindful-based strategies, or make sure you keep your brain active, use it or lose it, engaged in cognitive tasks to restore it back to that baseline level. It's more difficult when it sounds, when people are still waiting 8 to 10 years to get a diagnosis in the first place.
And that is all for the video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any thoughts on the topics discussed, I would love to hear them in the comments below. Also, a like, a share, a subscribe, it all goes really far for a new YouTuber, so I would really appreciate it. And that's all. Okay, bye!